Hello everyone, this is Erik, the Asian movie enthusiast, and this is my review of Carter, a Korean action movie from 2022 that was directed by Jung Byung-gil, the man who previously gave us Confession of Murder and The Villainess. Thrown straight into a dangerous mission with none of his memories intact, a man must escape death while trying to figure out who he is, how he ended up there, and who is the mysterious voice in his ear, calling him Carter. This is an all-out action movie, so a lot of people out there are going to criticize the character development, and I do think there is justification for this complaint, because the characters are pretty much wafer thin. That includes our lead protagonist, who's kind of flat in terms of personality. He's played by Ju-won, who K-drama fans will recognize from his television work, which includes Bridal Mask, which is a very good TV show. He's definitely been hitting the gym recently, though, because his physique, like his physical presence, is quite solid in this, and he's actually quite imposing physically, which matches the demands of the movie. The script did not give him a lot to work with, though, because it generally fails to provide any charismatic moments that would give him more color and likability. The side characters are also kind of thin. The odd thing is that some of them are given like dramatic monologues at certain points, which makes you think that they would be a big part of the story, but then after their big speeches, they kind of fall into the background, which is kind of odd. I was actually hoping that a few of those characters would show up again later in the movie, but I guess it happens maybe once or twice, but not very often. Dialogue can get pretty bad at times, and the acting is very inconsistent, especially by the English-speaking cast. Now, I do think that the story is actually pretty good, despite some flaws of its own. There's a huge exposition data dump scene about 20 minutes in, and it did feel kind of rushed. It's just like a character shows up, and it's just like, blah, 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 blah. Okay, here are some weapons. Now go quickly and kill more people. You know, it was kind of rushed. But in the film's defense, it eventually does a good job of keeping the viewer off balance with a very windy story that kind of muddies the waters. Now, which government is really the bad guys in this movie? Is it the South Koreans, the North Koreans, the United States, or someone else? And some plot lines actually do make sense by the end of the film, because it's kind of confusing early on. Some stuff does end up making sense, like why our protagonist has amnesia. So, that's good. There are a few weird scenes peppered in as well that I actually kind of liked. Like the floor of a building that's used by the CIA, but was built to be like a children's playland with a spooky haunted floor attraction. Like what is this? Like, where am I right now, you know? Or there's a weird protest scene that involves duplicate versions of some of the characters. It's kind of odd, a little weird, but I did like those moments. None of the aforementioned criticisms that I've made are really that big of a deal to me, because Carter is an action-packed extravaganza from front to back. And I must say that this is probably one of the most ambitious action movies I've seen in a while, at least in terms of capturing a huge variety of action set pieces through a single camera movement, moving in and out of the action as necessary. And because of this, the film has the effect of a one-shot take, with events happening in real time, which makes it incredibly difficult to pull off, even though it wasn't actually shot in a single take, but just creating the effect is tough enough. Now you're probably saying to yourself, wait a minute, movies have actually been shot in a single take before. Heck, some movies have mimicked a one-take shot, even though they didn't actually do it. So what's the deal with Carter? What makes this different? Well, let me tell you. This is not like a low-budget horror movie, for example, where they can, be pretty conservative with the production. When they need to edit or finish a take, they can pan a camera into a dark room and the whole screen turns, gets black. And then the director goes, okay, cut. All right, let's set up for the next shot. And then they start the shot there and pan out and continue. It's a very nice edit point to work around. Very kind of convenient for that type of film. This isn't that. This is also not a lower budget action movie that maybe could use some old school camera work, rely on some, the timing of squibs and certain explosions, or rely on a first-person view, like just put a camera on a cameraman, like a steady cam, just have him go, the whole movie. It kind of limits the having to like put the camera on cranes or whatever. It makes it a little bit easier. No. Carter is a completely insane, blockbuster-style action extravaganza that wants to maintain the one-shot effect while the camera's moving all over the place. So, for example, let's have a huge action scene with helicopters and land vehicles and a moving train, but let's shoot it as if the camera is gliding around, through, and beneath all of these vehicles, capturing everything, almost like if it was like the greatest drone ever made with a camera on it. Just like flying through helicopters as they explode. A rocket's being propelled out, so now we got to follow the rocket as it blows up a part of the train, and you know what I mean? This is the effect that you get. All right, and there are highly choreographed fight scenes in this, so that's why this movie is so ambitious from an action design standpoint. It's completely ridiculous. So the filmmakers, the challenge is that they had to shoot a bunch of shots like a typical blockbuster. They can't do this in a one-shot take, but somehow stitch all of these shots together to create an artificially seamless camera perspective, and that's where we get the film's greatest weakness. Jerky camera movements and computer effects. Now, there are some old-school techniques that they use in this. Like, for example, there are a number of moments where you get, zoom-ins into a character's back, and then it zooms back out fast, and an obvious edit point. Kind of a cheap tactic, and it's very noticeable, but it kind of works. The problem that I suspect is that the filmmakers primarily used jerky camera movements and computer effects to hide their edits. Most of them. Because if you jerk the camera a little bit, it distracts the viewer's eyes just enough where you can edit, while the camera jerks. And that's a way of doing it, but there's a lot of jerky camera in this movie. It's not shaky cam per se. It's different. It's almost like if you were on a carnival ride where it's smooth for a second and then it jolts, and then it's smooth and then it jolts again. You feel like you're getting kind of whiplashed a little bit during the scene. It's kind of like that. And when you consider what the filmmakers were going for, that type of camera trick, it works okay. And if they limited themselves to that, the film, I think, would have been better. And that's why the opening 30 minutes probably have the most compelling action scenes of the film. The opening sauna fight is pretty entertaining, really violent. And then there's a neat infiltration scene involving a grappling hook device. And these scenes have moments that do look a little awkward because of how they kind of edit it together. But the visual effects are still stronger than some of the later scenes. So if you watch Carter, if you decide to even watch this movie, and you hate the opening 30 minutes, just turn the movie off. Because it's not going to get any better. All right, it's just to let you know. All right, so I did like certain parts of the action because there was a high body count. It gets pretty bloody and violent at times, which I liked. Completely unrealistic, but it does have its entertainment value. So, as I alluded to, the biggest problem is how they handle the edit points in this. And I've only talked about some techniques. The jerky cam is kind of distracting, but they also do some other stuff. They mix up the frame rate effects, which are real wonky. It feels like you're skipping frames sometimes. Sometimes it feels like the frames have slowed down. Sometimes it feels like it's sped up erratically. And then worst of all, the CGI and green screen effects are just atrocious in this film. Some of the effects reminded me of Koji Shiraishi's zero-budget horror movies. If you've ever heard me talk about them in my Asian horror playlist. Movies that are made on, shoestring budget, and the CG effects look like almost like picture cutouts of people in the sky. You get some of that in this. I'm not joking. There's a skydiving scene. Perfect example. It looks like none of the characters look real. It's so weird to, describe what it looks like. Now, back in the 90s, there were movies like Terminal Velocity and Drop Zone, they had way better skydive sequences in this film. And those movies were made way back in '94. But they did not have this ridiculous one-shot take requirement hanging over them every minute. So, I'll give credit to the skydiving scene in Carter. Fantastic idea in concept with what happens, but it looked too fake. The way the film is shot, it makes it seem artificial, like we're in some kind of Matrix or video game world. Suspension of disbelief becomes very difficult at times because the presentation is so constantly distracting. It's distracting you from just watching the freaking movie, right? The first scene where this is really evident, I hate to keep going on with this, but I gotta make this point. The first scene that's really gonna throw you off is the cab chase, the taxi cab chase. Real shame because it's really nicely choreographed. Like, the fighting is good in this film. But there's a ton of like wonky green screen effects, and it makes the characters seem like they're not even in the same place as like their environment. They have weird outlines around them, almost like bad CGI from the early 90s. And the color tones don't match between the characters and their environments. It's just too friggin' distracting. And of course, the camera's constantly getting jerked around the whole time. There's a train scene later that has the same problem. And I think you get the picture. I think if this movie had a huge budget and state-of-the-art computer effects, like 2022 state-of-the-art, it might have worked better. But even that's stretching it. I almost think they should have incorporated a video game world plot into the actual story. Like, everyone in the movie's part of a video game, and like our main character's rebellious acts are shorting out the system, kind of like the Matrix. It would have been a dumb plot, but I think it would have worked better because I could have suspended my disbelief a little bit more. But with all that said, you can see some of the awesomeness of this concept in action in this film. The positioning and the movement of the camera is really cool. Like, it's crazy. Like, some stuff in here I've never even seen in like a live action movie before. And if this was like the unfinished version of a film that still had $100 million special effects budget in post-production that was left to do, I would be buying it for my collection. It's just insane. It's like over 2 hours long. It's just nonstop action shenanigans, like in breakneck pacing the whole time. So despite all of its flaws, most of the big ones being visual, I could still sit through this. It's action trash that lacks any kind of craftsmanship that's necessary to give it like a legitimate defense, really. But again, there are elements that are good. The fight choreography, the concepts, the storyboarding and stuff like that with like where the camera's supposed to go. And I found it easy to sit through. I did. Definitely stepped down from the Villainess, which had a very nice action design that was grounded enough to keep you engaged. I think this director just went off the deep end. He like jumped the shark with this movie. Like, how do you go from the Villainess to this? It's just like mind-blowingly cartoonish. He bit off more than he could chew with this one, I think. But when all is said and done, I'm cautiously recommending this film. Even action junkies might not like it due to its presentation style, but I honestly don't know who to recommend this movie to. You have to be very forgiving over special effects and very forgiving over dodgy writing. But like I said, the easiest thing to do, fire it up, watch the first half hour. If you like the first half hour, give the rest of it a shot. If you don't, there's no way you're liking the film. So that's the easy recommendation for you. Watch the first half hour, and then have your finger on the eject button. Whenever you get sick of it. It's currently available on Netflix, and as always, I'll see you next time.